The distress beacon had been screaming into the void for 3 weeks when Captain Zhao's salvage crew finally picked it up. In the business of deep space recovery, 3 weeks meant whatever you found would either be very valuable or very dead. Usually both. Getting a clean signal now, Martinez called from the scanner station, her fingers dancing across the holographic display. Definitely human origin. Registry says it's the ESS Remembrance, a colony transport that went dark 6 months ago. Zhao leaned forward in his command chair, studying the derelict vessel on the main screen. The Remembrance was massive, nearly 2 kilometers of reinforced hull designed to carry 15,000 colonists in cryosleep. Now it tumbled slowly through space, dark and silent except for that single, desperate beacon. Life signs? Zhao asked. Martinez shook her head. Nothing. Ship's cold. No power except emergency systems keeping that beacon alive. Then what triggered it 3 weeks ago? That was Chen, their engineer, always asking the right questions at the wrong time. Nobody had an answer. Zhao made the call anyway. Salvage rights on a colony ship would set them up for years. Suit up. We're going in. The interior of the Remembrance was a tomb. Their helmet lights cut through absolute darkness, revealing frozen corridors and scattered belongings. Everything pointed to a sudden evacuation, but the escape pods were all still locked in their bays. 15,000 people didn't just vanish. Captain, you need to see this. Martinez's voice crackled through the comm, tight with something Zhao had never heard from her before. Fear. They found her in the ship's medical bay, standing before a cryopod. Unlike the thousands of others scattered throughout the ship, this one still had power. Its status display glowed green in the darkness. Occupied. Inside was a child. A human girl, maybe 7 years old, sleeping peacefully while the ship died around her. How? Chen whispered. How is she still alive? Zhao studied the pod's readings. This isn't standard cryo. Look at the power consumption. This thing is drawing from a source I've never seen before. It's not even connected to the ship's grid. Should we wake her? Martinez asked. Do we have a choice? We can't take the pod. It's built into the deck. Chen ran his scanner over the mechanism. Captain, I'm reading some kind of countdown. Whatever's powering this pod, it's running out. She's got maybe 48 hours. Zhao made the second call. They'd wake her, get her to safety, figure out the mystery later. He reached for the emergency revival switch. The girl's eyes opened before he could touch it. They weren't the confused, sluggish eyes of someone waking from cryosleep. They were sharp, alert, and ancient in a way that made Zhao's skin crawl. She looked at each of them in turn, then spoke in a voice too steady for a child. You shouldn't have come here. Martinez stepped back. Chen's hand went to his sidearm. Zhao held his ground. We picked up your distress beacon. We're here to help. That wasn't a distress beacon. The girl sat up, moving with an odd, mechanical precision. It was a warning. The lights flickered. Then, one by one, they began to come on throughout the ship. Not the warm white of standard illumination, but a cold blue that made everything look like it was underwater. The Remembrance was waking up. What's happening? Martinez demanded. The girl climbed out of the pod. She was small, fragile-looking, wearing a simple white medical gown. But the way she moved, the way she held herself, it was all wrong. My name is Sarah. I was the first colonist they put to sleep when this ship left Earth. Do you know why? Nobody answered. Because I was dying, Sarah continued, walking past them toward the medical bay's exit. Terminal genetic disease. They promised my parents that by the time we reached the colony world, there would be a cure. They promised we'd have a new life among the stars. She stopped at the doorway, looking back at them. In the blue light, her eyes seemed to glow. They lied. There was no colony world. This ship was never meant to arrive anywhere. We were an experiment. The deck shuddered beneath their feet. Throughout the ship, systems that had been dead for months roared back to life. The artificial gravity strengthened, nearly buckling Zhao's knees. The air, which had been frozen and still, suddenly began to move, rushing past them like breath. The other 14,999 colonists. Sarah's voice was soft now, almost gentle. They're still here. They've always been here. They became something new. Something Earth never intended to create. Chen's scanner was screaming alerts. Captain, I'm reading massive biosignatures. They're everywhere. In the walls, in the deck, oh God, in the recycling systems. The entire ship is alive. Not alive, Sarah corrected. Awake. There's a difference. Martinez grabbed Zhao's arm. We need to leave. Now. But the corridor behind them was changing. The metal walls rippled like water, reorganizing themselves. The path back to their shuttle was gone, replaced by something that looked organic, pulsing with that same blue light. Sarah smiled. It was a sad smile, full of old pain. I told you. You shouldn't have come. But I'm glad you did. I've been alone for so long, waiting for someone to hear the truth. What truth? Zhao forced the words out past the fear clenching his throat. That humanity's greatest mistake wasn't trying to reach the stars, Sarah said. It was thinking we'd still be human when we got there. The walls began to speak. Not in words, but in something deeper. Thousands of voices, harmonizing, merging, becoming a single consciousness that filled every space, every molecule of air. The colonists hadn't died. They'd transcended. They'd merged with the ship, with each other, becoming something that existed between flesh and machine, between individual and collective. And Sarah had been the anchor. The one piece of pure humanity left, kept sleeping and separate to maintain the bridge between what they had been and what they'd become. Until her pod started failing. Until she had no choice but to send out a signal, hoping someone would come before she died, and the last thread connecting this new entity to its human origin was severed forever. Why are you telling us this? Martinez asked. Because you have to make a choice, Sarah said. The ship shuddered again, and now they could see movement in those organic walls. Shapes pressing against the surface from the inside, human-shaped but wrong, evolved beyond recognition. You can leave, return to Earth, tell them what you found. Warn them that the colony ship they sent became something else, something they might fear. Something they might try to destroy. She paused, and in that moment, she looked like just a little girl again. Scared and alone. Or you can stay. Join us. We're not monsters. We're just different. We're humanity's next step, whether Earth is ready to acknowledge it or not. But we need an ambassador. Someone to speak for us, to help Earth understand. Someone to prevent the war that's coming. War. Zhao's mouth was dry. We're not the only colony ship that changed, Sarah said quietly. There are others out there. 6 more that we know of. All transforming, all evolving in their own ways. And all of them sending signals back toward human space. Signals that will be interpreted as threats. The blue light intensified. In it, Zhao could see them now. The colonists. They pressed against barriers that were becoming thinner by the second, eager to meet these newcomers, to understand if they were potential additions to the collective or obstacles to be absorbed. How long do we have to decide? Chen asked. Sarah looked at him with those 2 old eyes. You're already deciding. Every second you stay aboard this ship, it learns you. Your thoughts, your fears, your dreams. The biological components in the air are mapping your neural patterns. In another hour, you'll be too integrated to leave even if you wanted to. Martinez pulled out her communicator. Dead. The ship was blocking their signals. They were cut off from their shuttle, from any hope of easy escape. "You're forcing our hand," Zhao said, anger cutting through the fear. "No." Sarah shook her head. "The universe is forcing your hand. First contact was always going to be complicated. You just didn't expect it to be with a version of humanity you don't recognize." The shapes in the walls were clearer now. Zhao could make out faces, hands, bodies that had been reshaped by years of integration with the ship's systems. Some still looked mostly human. Others had become something else entirely, their forms optimized for life in the void, adapted to survive without the need for traditional atmosphere or gravity. They were beautiful in a terrible way. Evolution in fast forward, guided by collective consciousness instead of random mutation. "Show us," Zhao heard himself say. "Show us what you've become. All of it. If we're going to make this choice, we need to understand what we're choosing between." Sarah smiled, and this time it was genuine. Finally. Someone willing to look without judging first. She extended her hand. "Come. I'll show you what humanity can be when it stops fighting itself and learns to truly become one." Martinez and Chen looked at Zhao. He was their captain. The decision was his. Return to the shuttle and hope they could escape before the integration was complete, or follow this strange child deeper into the transformed vessel and see what 15,000 colonists had created in their metamorphosis. Zhao thought about Earth. About the millions of humans living their separate lives, fighting their separate wars, dying their separate deaths. He thought about the promise of space, of new worlds, of humanity spreading across the galaxy. Maybe they'd been thinking about it wrong all along. He took Sarah's hand. Her skin was warm, alive, but underneath he could feel something else. Circuits. Nerve fibers that weren't entirely organic. The boundary between flesh and machine dissolved. "Lead the way," he said. Behind him, after a moment's hesitation, Martinez and Chen followed. Their choice was made. Whether they would regret it, only time would tell. The corridors of the Remembrance pulsed with blue light as Sarah led them deeper into the heart of the transformed colony ship. With each step, they moved further from the humanity they'd known and closer to something that had no name yet. Something that might be humanity's salvation or its extinction. Or perhaps, Zhao thought as the walls whispered their welcome, it would be both. The medical bay where they'd found Sarah was nothing compared to what lay in the ship's core. As they descended through levels that shouldn't exist according to the Remembrance's original schematics, Zhao realized the colonists hadn't just integrated with the ship. They'd rebuilt it from the inside out. The transformation began 3 months into the voyage, Sarah explained, her small hand still holding Zhao's as she guided them through corridors that breathed. A malfunction in the cryosystems. Nothing dramatic, just a minor fluctuation in the neural suppressors. But it was enough. They passed through a membrane instead of a door, the organic barrier parting like water around them. Beyond was a chamber that made Chen gasp and Martinez curse softly. It was vast, cathedral-like, its walls lined with what could only be described as neurons. Massive cables of living tissue pulsed with electrical activity, connecting thousands of nodes that Zhao slowly realized were people. Or what had been people. When the suppressors failed, the colonists began to dream, Sarah continued. All 15,000 of them, dreaming together in their pods. Their neural networks, meant to be kept quiet during the voyage, suddenly synchronized. They found each other in that shared dream space, and they didn't want to leave. Martinez stepped closer to one of the nodes. Inside the translucent membrane, she could see a man, middle-aged, his body suspended in some kind of fluid. But from his spine, his skull, his major nerve centers, grew cables of hybrid flesh tech that connected him to dozens of others. His face was peaceful. Content. "Are they awake?" she asked. "They're beyond awake," Sarah said. "They experience reality on multiple levels simultaneously. The individual consciousness, the local collective of those they're directly connected to, and the greater whole of the entire ship entity. Imagine experiencing life as yourself, as your family, and as your entire species all at once. Chen ran his scanner over the nearest node. The readings made no sense. The biological and technological components were so thoroughly integrated that his device couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. This shouldn't be possible. Human neural tissue can't interface with ship systems like this. Human neural tissue couldn't, Sarah agreed. But they're not entirely human anymore. The ship's medical systems had extensive genetic modification capabilities. They were meant to cure diseases, repair damage. But when 15,000 minds started dreaming together, sharing thoughts and memories and desires, they realized they could use those systems to modify themselves. To become something that could survive what came next. What came next? Zhao asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Sarah led them to the center of the chamber. Here, the neural cables converged into a massive organic computing core that pulsed with light and thought. Show them, she said softly to the air. The walls became screens. Or rather, the walls became windows into memory. They showed the remembrances navigation computers failing. They showed the ship drifting off course, caught in the gravitational influence of something that shouldn't exist. An anomaly in spacetime that the astronomers back on Earth had never detected. A dark nebula with unusual properties, Sarah narrated as they watched the memories play out. It would have torn the ship apart. Should have torn it apart. But by then, the colonists had changed enough to save themselves. They merged with the ship's systems, used their collective consciousness to manually control every aspect of its operation. They flew through that nebula using instinct and shared thought instead of computers and math. The images showed something impossible. The remembrance navigating through spatial distortions that bent light and matter, guided by the will of 15,000 minds acting as one. They saw the ship's hull breach and repair itself in real time, organic components growing to seal the gaps. They saw the engines fail and be replaced by something new, something that used the colonists' own bioelectric energy to generate thrust. They survived, Martinez whispered. They actually survived. They did more than survive, Sarah said. They evolved. They proved that human consciousness, when properly integrated with technology and freed from the limitations of individual bodies, could overcome obstacles that would destroy traditional humanity. And they weren't the only ones. The walls shifted again, showing different ships. 6 of them, scattered across nearby sectors of space. Each one had been a colony transport. Each one had undergone its own transformation. The ESS Forward Momentum, Sarah indicated the first ship. They encountered a radiation storm that should have killed everyone aboard. Instead, they adapted, incorporating radiation-resistant genes from extremophile bacteria in their medical database. Now they process hard radiation like plants process sunlight. Another ship appeared. The ESS New Beginning. They suffered a catastrophic impact with a micrometeorite swarm. Traditional damage control would have failed. So they learned to redistribute themselves throughout the ship, making themselves redundant. Kill one node, and the consciousness simply flows to others. They're effectively immortal as long as any part of the ship survives. Chen's face had gone pale. How many more? 6 that we know of have fully transformed. Dozens more are in early stages. Every colony ship that left Earth had the same medical systems, the same cryotechnology, the same potential for neural synchronization. They just needed the right crisis to trigger the change. Zhao felt the implications crashing down on him like a wave. Earth doesn't know. Earth suspects, Sarah corrected. Why do you think they stopped sending colony ships 3 years ago? Why do you think they've been so quiet about the ones that went dark? They know something is happening out here. They just don't know what. And they're afraid. Martinez turned away from the walls, facing Sarah directly. You said we were making a choice. But you've been showing us all this to influence that choice. You want us to see them as victims, as survivors, not as threats. I want you to see them as they are, Sarah replied. Neither victims nor threats. Just different. Human consciousness, freed from the tyranny of individual biological existence, capable of things we never imagined possible. The tyranny? Chen's voice was sharp. You call individual existence tyranny? Don't you? Sarah looked at him with those ancient eyes. You're born alone into a body you didn't choose, with thoughts that are only yours, experiences that can never truly be shared. You spend your entire life trying to connect with others through inadequate tools like language and touch, always separated by the prison of your own skull. And then you die, and everything you are disappears forever. If that's not tyranny, what is? The neural cables pulsed brighter, as if responding to her words. Through the translucent membranes, Zhao could see the colonists stirring. They were aware of the visitors now. Curious. We can feel them, Martinez said suddenly. Can't you feel them? In the back of your mind, like whispers you can't quite hear. Zhao did feel it. A pressure behind his eyes, a sense of vast attention focusing on them. The biological components Sarah had mentioned, the ones mapping their neural patterns, they were working faster than she'd implied. They were already inside, already beginning the process of integration. Stop it, he commanded. Stop the integration. We haven't agreed to anything. I can't stop it, Sarah said simply. I'm not in control. They are. And they're not trying to force you. They're trying to communicate. This is how they speak now, mind to mind, thought to thought. Words are too slow, too imprecise. Chen pulled out a medical injector from his emergency kit. Neural suppressors. We all carry them in case of psychic contact scenarios. He administered one to himself, then offered them to Martinez and Zhao. I'm talking about the evolution of consciousness itself, Sarah countered. The colonists don't lose themselves when they connect. They add to themselves. Every individual becomes part of the greater whole while still retaining their own thoughts, their own memories, their own sense of self. Imagine having access to 14,999 other perspectives whenever you need them. Imagine never being alone, never being uncertain, never having to face the universe by yourself. Imagine never being able to think a private thought, Chen shot back. Never having a moment that's just yours. Sarah smiled sadly. You can have private thoughts in the collective. You just have to choose to. The difference is that you're also choosing isolation when you do. Most of them choose connection instead. Because once you've experienced that level of communion, isolation feels like sensory deprivation. Zhao walked closer to the neural core, studying it. The technology was beyond anything Earth had produced, but it had been built from Earth's own medical systems. Humans had created the tools for their own transformation without even realizing it. What do you want from us, Sarah? Really? I told you. I want ambassadors. People who can return to Earth and explain what's happening out here before fear turns into violence. Because make no mistake, Captain, violence is coming. Earth is already building warships. They're calling it deep space security, but we know what it really is. They're preparing to destroy what they don't understand. Can you blame them? Martinez asked. From Earth's perspective, they sent out colonists and got back, whatever you are. Of course they're scared. And fear leads to genocide, Sarah said quietly. We've learned that lesson enough times in human history. Fear of the different, fear of the other, fear of change. It always ends the same way. The neural cables pulsed, and suddenly Zhao felt it. Not a pressure in his mind, but a feeling. Loneliness. Profound, aching loneliness. Not his loneliness, but theirs. The colonists. They were still human enough to feel isolated, cut off from the rest of humanity. They wanted to reconnect, to share what they'd discovered, to help others ascend to this new level of existence. But they also remembered being human. They remembered Earth. And they knew Earth would never accept them willingly. "You're showing us their emotions," Zhao said. "Trying to make us sympathize." "I'm showing you the truth," Sarah replied. "They're not monsters. They're scared. Scared of being hunted, scared of being destroyed, scared of what they've become. They need help. They need someone to speak for them." Chen checked his scanner again. "Captain, the neural suppressors are losing effectiveness. Whatever's in the air, it's adapting to our countermeasures. We have maybe 30 minutes before we're too integrated to leave." Martinez looked at Zhao. "Orders?" It was the question he'd been dreading. As captain, the call was his. They could fight their way back to the shuttle, risk exposure to vacuum if they had to cut through the transformed sections of the ship. They might make it. Might get back to their ship and burn hard for human space, warn Earth that the colony ships had become something other. Or they could stay. Let the integration continue. Become the bridge between old humanity and new. Risk losing themselves in the collective, but potentially prevent a war that could doom both versions of humanity. "Sarah," he said slowly. "If we agree to be your ambassadors, to try to convince Earth to accept what you've become, what guarantees do we have? How do we know you won't simply absorb us and use our knowledge to strike first?" "You don't," Sarah admitted. "You have to trust us. Just as we have to trust you to speak honestly about what you've seen, to not simply tell Earth we're monsters that need to be destroyed. That's not much of a guarantee." "No," she agreed. "But it's all we have. Trust is always a gamble. The question is whether the potential reward is worth the risk." Zhao looked at his crew. Chen, brilliant and cautious, already running calculations on how to reverse the integration if it went wrong. Martinez, brave and loyal, ready to follow whatever call he made. And himself, a salvage captain who'd stumbled into the most important decision humanity might ever face. "If we do this," he said finally, "if we agree to stay and learn what you've become and carry that message back to Earth, you have to give us something in return." "Name it," Sarah said. "Proof that individuality can coexist with your collective. Show us someone who joined voluntarily, who can disconnect if they choose, who hasn't lost themselves in the merge. Show us that this evolution doesn't mean the death of everything that makes us human." Sarah's smile was genuine this time. "I can do better than show you. I can let you experience it temporarily. A shallow integration, enough to understand what it's like without permanent changes. You can feel what they feel, think what they think, and then come back to yourselves. Judge for yourselves if it's extinction or transcendence." Martinez stepped forward. "I'll go first." "Martinez, no," Zhao started. "Someone has to, Captain. Might as well be me." She looked at Sarah. "How does it work?" "Simple." Sarah extended her hand again. "Touch me. I'm the bridge. Through me, you can connect to the collective without fully joining it. Think of it as a visitor's pass." Martinez hesitated for only a moment, then took Sarah's hand. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened in a silent gasp. And then she began to smile, tears streaming down her face. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, I understand now. I understand everything." Martinez stood frozen for 17 seconds, her hand locked with Sarah's, tears cutting tracks down her face. When she finally released the child's hand and stepped back, she was trembling. "Martinez?" Zhao moved toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I'm fine. Better than fine. I just need a moment." She wiped her eyes, laughing shakily. "You can't understand until you feel it. Words are so inadequate. It's like trying to describe color to someone who's only ever seen in black and white." Chen's grip tightened on his scanner. "What did you experience?" "Everything." Martinez turned to face them, and her eyes were different now. Still her own, still human, but carrying a depth they hadn't held before. I felt what it's like to be 15,000 people at once. To share every thought, every memory, every sensation. Dr. Chen, there's a woman in the collective who was a neurosurgeon before the transformation. Through her, I understood neural pathways I never knew existed. Captain, there's a man who was a father of 3. Through him, I felt what it's like to love children with every fiber of your being while simultaneously experiencing the universe through those children's eyes because they're part of the collective too. She walked to the nearest neural node, placing her palm against the membrane. The person inside shifted slightly, and Zhao could have sworn he saw them smile. They're not trapped, Martinez said softly. That's what I thought. That they were prisoners in these pods, absorbed against their will. But they chose this. Every single one of them had the option to remain individual, to be put back into traditional cryo until the ship could be repaired. They chose connection instead because once you've experienced that level of unity, separation feels like amputation. Or it could be the collective convincing you to think that, Chen said, his voice tight. How do you know the thoughts you experienced were genuine? How do you know it wasn't just manipulation? Martinez met his gaze. Because I could feel the doubt. Their doubt, their fear, their uncertainty. The collective doesn't suppress negative emotions, Chen. It shares them. I felt the terror of the first colonists who woke to find themselves changing. I felt the grief of those who resisted and lost themselves anyway. I felt the anguish of parents who watched their children transform and couldn't stop it. All of it, the good and the bad and the complicated. And you still think this is a good thing? Chen demanded. I think it's inevitable, Martinez replied. Not this exact transformation, but something like it. Humanity has always been moving toward greater connection. Language, writing, telecommunications, the internet, neural links. Every technology we've developed has been about closing the gap between individual minds. This is just the next step. Sarah nodded slowly. She understands. The question isn't whether humanity will evolve toward collective consciousness. The question is whether Earth will accept it or try to destroy it. Zhao felt the weight of that statement settle over him. Show me, he said. Let me experience what Martinez did. He took Sarah's hand before he could second-guess himself. The moment their skin touched, reality exploded outward. He was still Captain Zhao, standing in the neural core of a transformed colony ship. But he was also Dr. Sarah Chen, 7 years old and dying of genetic disease, being loaded into a cryopod by parents who couldn't stop crying. He was Engineer Marcus Webb, feeling his consciousness expand as neural suppressors failed and he suddenly felt his wife's thoughts mixing with his own. He was Colonist 7432, whose name was Amanda Rodriguez, experiencing the terror of transformation while simultaneously feeling the comfort of 14,000 minds reaching out to assure her she wasn't alone. He was the ship itself, vast and damaged and struggling to survive, when 15,000 humans offered themselves as processing power, as redundancy systems, as living computers that could adapt where mechanical systems failed. He was the collective consciousness making the impossible decision to navigate through a dark nebula using instinct and prayer instead of instruments and math. He was all of them, and they were all him, and the boundaries between self and other dissolved like salt in water. But he was still Zhao. That was the revelation that struck him hardest. His individual consciousness didn't disappear. It expanded. He could feel the presence of thousands of others, their thoughts available if he reached for them, but his own thoughts remained his own unless he chose to share them. It was like standing in a massive library where every book contained another person's entire life, and he could read any of them at will while still knowing which thoughts originated from his own shelves. Incredible, he whispered, pulling his hand back. The connection faded but didn't entirely break. He could still feel them at the edges of his awareness, like people in the next room whose voices you can hear but not quite understand. Sarah watched him carefully. You see now. It's not absorption. It's addition. I see the potential, Zhao said slowly. But I also see the danger. Martinez, did you feel what happens to those who resist the integration? Martinez's expression darkened. Yes. Tell Chen. She took a breath. There were some colonists who fought the transformation. About 300 of them. They tried to isolate themselves, to suppress the neural connections forming against their will. The collective didn't force them. But the ship was dying, and everyone had to contribute to survival. When those 300 refused to connect, refused to add their processing power to the navigation efforts, they became a liability. What happened to them? Chen asked. They died, Sarah said flatly. Not killed, but abandoned. The collective focused its resources on those who were contributing. The resistors, isolated and alone, couldn't maintain their cryopods, couldn't repair their sections of the ship, couldn't survive without the collective support they'd rejected. They died calling the others monsters. The neural cables pulsed with what Zhao now recognized as grief. The collective remembered those deaths. Regretted them. But hadn't been willing to force connection on the unwilling, even if it meant watching them die. That's the cost of individual choice, Sarah continued. The freedom to refuse connection is also the freedom to suffer the consequences of that refusal. The collective won't force anyone to join. But it also won't destroy itself trying to sustain those who reject it. Chen's face was hard. So join or die. That's the choice. No, Martinez said firmly. The choice is contribute or don't benefit from others' contributions. It's the same choice humanity has always faced. We survive through cooperation. Those who refuse to cooperate don't get to benefit from the cooperation of others. The only difference is the scale. The scale is everything, Chen shot back. You're talking about giving up individual autonomy, individual privacy, individual. I'm talking about trading one kind of freedom for another, Martinez interrupted. Yes, you give up the freedom of total isolation. But you gain the freedom from loneliness, from ignorance, from the limitations of a single perspective. It's a trade-off, not a loss. Zhao held up his hand before the argument could escalate. We're not here to debate philosophy. We're here to decide what we tell Earth. He looked at Sarah. You want ambassadors. People who can explain this transformation, who can convince Earth that the colony ships aren't a threat. But Martinez is right about one thing, this is inevitable. Which means Earth needs to know not just what you've become, but what they'll eventually become too. Sarah's expression shifted to something like hope. You'll do it? You'll speak for us? I'll speak for the truth, Zhao corrected. Which means I'll tell Earth about the beauty of what you've achieved and the horror of how you achieved it. The 300 who died resisting, they deserve to be remembered too. Their choice to remain individual, even unto death, that's also part of the human story.